When Mira booked the table, her hands did not shake. When the concierge confirmed the time and promised discretion, she thanked him softly and looked out at the street, where buses hissed and schoolchildren laughed. She felt the world moving, in its ordinary rhythm, the way it always had, before secrets bent time and bent her breath. The restaurant sat 3 floors above the city, high enough to watch gulls turn in the late light, high enough that a person could pretend trouble lived somewhere lower. She did not go there to fight. She did not go there to prove her worth. She went there to put the truth in the room and let it breathe. Her billionaire husband had chosen that same room for many lunches. Most people noticed him when he entered. Most people never noticed the quiet woman near the window who knew the shape of his stride before she looked up. On that day, she reserved the table next to his. On that day, she brought the one person who deserved to see what she had seen. She brought the man whose life was being emptied cup by cup. The man who still ironed his shirts on Sundays because he believed in small orders of love. She brought the mistress's husband. Before everything changed, Mira lived in a house that never hurried. She grew herbs along the kitchen sill and clipped sprigs with a pair of dull scissors. She wore sweaters that made her look like early evening. The children joked that she floated rather than walked. She liked that. She liked being a soft thing in a hard place. Her husband, Adrian Vale, built a world from glass and speed. His name sat on office towers and racing yachts. He looked like a promise on magazine covers. People wrote about his mind. People guessed at his heart. In the early years, he would come home still tasting of wind, his voice low from the day, his shoulders tired. He used to put his phone in a drawer when he reached the porch and leave it there while he ate. He used to ask about the garden. He used to sit on the floor and let their daughter braid his hair. 3 rubber bands at the end, and he would walk like that around the house without shame. When success lifted him beyond sleep and into something that looked like flight, she was proud. Her pride was not loud. It was an old shawl pulled closer during rain. They met in college long before glass and speed. She carried a notebook and a thermos of tea. He carried ideas like stones in his pockets. He could not pass a bookstore without stopping. They were very poor then. There are kinds of poverty that pinch, and kinds that carry a thin music. They had the music kind they used to walk past apartments and place their dream furniture in rooms they did not own. A lamp here, a table there. If they argued, it was quiet and ended with one of them putting a hand on the other's shoulder. They married under a sycamore. It was not grand. It did not need to be. The old professor cried during his toast and said that their love looked like a clear river. Years later, when money learned their names, they bought the sycamore land from the farmer who owned it. They said it was for preservation. In truth, it was to protect a moment their life widened. Mira learned how to dress for rooms that measured people by their shadows. She moved through them like warm water. She never tried to impress. She did not need to. The children grew. The company grew. On their 10th anniversary, he gave her a ring with a stone the size of her fingernail. She wore it like a small moon. It was beautiful but heavy. She learned to take it off when kneading bread because it kept slipping toward her knuckle as if the weight wanted to leave. After that, gifts became louder and conversations became shorter. He stayed in the air, in cars, in meetings that had no edges. People do not notice how silence grows. It arrives like dusk. One evening she looked up and realized she had eaten half the soup without hearing her own spoon. The first sign arrived as a scent she could not name. It clung to his jacket one night the way fog clings to branches. It was not perfume she recognized. It was a feeling. People think betrayal announces itself with lipstick on collars and missed calls. Sometimes it is a shift in the way someone reaches for the salt. Sometimes it is the joylessness in a laugh that used to belong to home. He grew careful with his phone again, not like before, in their poor years, when it meant nothing, but like a man placing a snake in a glass bowl. His eyes began to live a few inches over her shoulder. When he said goodnight, his hand patted her back as if she were a colleague. She did not break, she listened. Listening is not passive. It is a discipline that keeps a person from drowning in their own guesses. She noticed names in his calendar that came and went like comets. She noticed one that returned, always at the same hour, always linked to lunches that lasted too long. The name was Lila Rowan. The name sounded like a bell rung in fog. When a friend whispered a rumor about a woman seen at his side near the marina, Mira did not argue. She thanked the friend for the mercy of honesty and went home. In the kitchen, she washed grapes and counted them until her hands steadied. She placed them on a plate for the children and sat on the tile floor until the dog climbed into her lap. The dog had white eyelashes. He rested his chin on her knee in a way that felt like a vow. There were other signs, the assistant clipped. New articles about Adrian and never about their philanthropy. Their daughter asked why her father missed the school play when he had been the kind of man who once left a boardroom to watch a recorder solo. Their son stopped leaving his Lego cities on the dining table because the dining table now belonged to strangers. Mira started walking at dawn. The city at that hour is a soft animal. Bread vans open their doors, and the streets smell like a story trying to begin. She would walk until the sky lightened, and then go back to the house that knew her footsteps. On those mornings, she did not feel abandoned. She felt spacious, like a room that had been cleaned for new flowers. The day she decided to act did not look like a day that would hold a decision. She was watering the basil and read an email by accident. It was not snooping, it was logistics. The message was a confirmation from a restaurant with glass walls and a view of water. The reservation sat under a name she knew was an alias, the kind people use when they want privacy without imagination. The note asked for the corner with the low light, asked for the champagne to be chilled, asked for oysters. It was familiar in tone, the way a person who feels above consequence writes. She looked at the time. She looked at the date. She washed her hands and laughed once without joy. Then she called the same restaurant. She asked for the table next to the corner, as close as a breath. She used her own name. She asked if they had room for two. The second seat was not for a friend, not for a lawyer, not for a sister who would hold her hand. The second seat belonged to another life that had been folded and tucked into a pocket as if it could be misplaced. She found him by way of small questions. People think billionaires are impossible to map. They are not. They leave waves wherever they pass. Leela Rowan worked at a gallery before she learned how to move in faster air. A photograph from a charity gala showed her with a man whose arm fit around her middle in a manner that spoke of years. A ring shone in that picture. The gallery's social page named him Tomas Rohan. He built chairs with his hands. The chairs were simple and held. From there, finding him was not hard. He answered his own phone. His voice sounded like someone who fixed his own sink. When Mira told him there was something he needed to see, something that would break him in ways that would eventually become places to breathe, he went quiet. He did not ask for details. He took a breath you could hear. He said he would meet her. The rising conflict began long before the lunch. It grew inside her like a careful fire. She made breakfast for the children and tied her son's shoelace twice because his foot would not stay still. She folded laundry that still smelled of the river where they lived summers. She signed school papers and packed a small bag. She placed the heavy ring in a velvet box and left it on the dresser. A moon returned to its first sky. Then she dressed in something that made no announcement. She pinned back her hair. She wrote a note that said she would be home for dinner. Nothing in her movements suggested a storm. Quiet revenge, if it is revenge at all. Looks like this. A person carrying truth the way one carries a sleeping child. At the restaurant, she arrived early. The host recognized her and grew nervous in a way that restaurants do when money and scandal might share a table. She smiled at him until his shoulders lowered. She asked for water and watched the city turn. The table next to hers waited under a folded white napkin. The corner seat held the mirror that flattered. She could feel the pulse in her throat but not in her hands. When Tomas walked in, he wore his nicest jacket, the kind for weddings. He did not look around like a man on a hunt. He walked like someone stepping into a hospital at night. He sat across from her, and they did not touch. They did not trade stories of who had noticed what first. They did not look at their phones. They looked at their lives as if they were maps spread on a table between them. He had rough knuckles. He did not hide them. She had a small scar on her wrist from a cutting board. Neither tried to be brave. They simply were, which is a form of courage. Adrian arrived at 1 o'clock with Leela beside him. He looked taller when he walked into rooms he owned with his money. He held her elbow with a familiarity that made the host relieve them of menus. To the other diners, they looked bright, the way people look just before they buy something they do not need. He sat with his back to Mira's table. Lila faced her. There was a flutter when Leela's eyes landed on Mira, a brief misrecognition. the way a person stares at a painting that looks like one they once saw in a different city. Leela smiled in polite confusion, then looked back at Adrian, whose mouth was already moving with the speed of a deal. There were oysters. There was the cold silver of the bucket. The light struck everything like a clean blade. Mira did not stage a scene. She did not raise her voice. She had planned only this, to let truth stand in a place that offered cloth napkins, not texts. She asked the waiter to send a bottle of water to the next table with her compliments. The waiter misunderstood and reached for a better bottle. She shook her head and lifted her glass. Plain water. The first time Lila sipped, she looked again and recognized the shape of the woman next to her as the shape of the obstacle that had become a habit to ignore. The second time, she recognized the man sitting beside that woman. Tomas did not stare at her with anger. Anger would have given her a rope to pull. He looked at her with the softness of a person who has stood in the rain too long and decided to stop blaming the sky. There was a small choreography then. Adrian felt the shift before he saw it. A successful man knows how a room changes shape around him. He slowed mid-sentence. He caught the side of Mira's face the way a swimmer catches a glint before understanding it is a lighthouse. He froze for a beat. In that beat, all the stories he had told himself about protecting her reordered. He had never feared her anger. He had never feared her tears. She had diluted both to protect the children. He feared her steadiness. He feared the way she could hold a moment without flinching. No one spoke. No one needed to. A bus breathed 3 floors below. The silver bucket swept on its tray. Somewhere, a gull turned a slow circle. Mira set her napkin on the table as if she were about to step away to wash her hands. Instead, she reached into her bag and placed a photograph on the linen. It was from the sycamore day. 2 people leaning into each other under a tree that had watched better promises than theirs. She did not slide it to his table. She did not point. She simply let it rest on the fabric, so that, when his eyes finally met hers, they found not accusation but origin. Tomas, with fingers that made chairs, placed a different photograph beside the first. Lila, in a white dress, on a porch, with a dog at her ankle. No tears, no words. Just 2 lives under glass. That was the turning point, not the shock of being seen, but the arrangement of beginnings in the place where an ending had been planned. Adrian looked at the photographs, then at the water, then at her. The room held its breath, as rooms do when something honest happens. The waiter stopped mid-step. The host folded the reservation book with care. Even the light paused, or seemed to. When people talk about karma, they speak of scales and balance. Sometimes karma is simply geometry, a straight line meeting a circle at the only place where they touch. The past met the present at a linen seam. A husband who forgot how to come home found his face reflected in a window he did not own. Mira stood first. She did not need to deliver a speech or demand apologies. She feared the performance more than the betrayal. Performances end. Truth keeps living in the body. She nodded once to the man she had loved and once to the man who had come to see. Her nod to Lila was not cruel. It was the kind of nod a teacher gives a student who understands the answer to a question too late for the exam. She paid for her water, she thanked the waiter, and meant it. She left the 2 photographs where they lay. She walked out into the cold that makes a face sting and went down 3 flights to the street that did not care. The resolution did not arrive that afternoon like a parade. It came in mail and meetings, and the slow work of signing pages that close endings and open accounts. Lawyers spoke in measured phrases. Adrian moved through the formalities with the shock of a man who has been told that gravity is a choice. He tried to negotiate with memory. He offered reasons that had once sounded reasonable to him. He wore his remorse like a new suit. The children watched with a kind of wisdom that belongs to those who have not asked for it. Mira kept the house quiet. She answered their questions in sentences that were true and small. She did not describe their father's mistakes with heat. She described his absence the way one describes whether it rained. We brought in the chairs. In the months that followed, she built something that did not need glass to stand. She took a portion of the settlement and bought the corner bakery where she had always wanted to write in the mornings. The old owner trained her to wake the ovens before the sun. Flour dusted her forearms. Heat kissed her face each dawn. The first weeks were chaos, but good chaos, the kind that proves the world is alive. She set aside a shelf for books and a jar for small notes. the jar filled with secrets that needed air, a woman leaving a man leaving a job, a college student afraid to go home, a grandfather planting a garden he might not live to see. She kept the notes in an old shoebox and read them at night at the table where Lego cities had once stood. The bakery became a kind of anchor for people who were still learning how to forgive themselves. Thomas stopped by once in a while. He brought a chair, always a different one, and left it in the corner near the window, where the light forgave everything. They did not become a pair. They became witnesses for one another. When they nodded hello, history relaxed. Sometimes he fixed a hinge under the counter and told her which oil maid would supple. Sometimes she slid him a croissant and asked about the dog with white eyelashes. They found a rhythm that did not ask for a future. It asked only for presence, which is rarer. Adrian tried to return a few times, not to the marriage, but to the house, to repeat the path from driveway to porch as if footsteps could unspool a thread. Mira allowed the visits that mattered to the children and declined the ones that were about his ache. He looked thinner. He looked like a man who had started hearing the sound of his own watch. Money made everything easy except healing. He told the children he loved them in ways they could keep. He learned to show up without announcement. He learned to wait in the car if he was early. The headlines moved on. The yachts moved on. The glass towers stayed. Time did what it always does. It softened edges and made hollows where new things could be planted. There was a quiet form of revenge, if that word must be used. It did not look like triumph. It looked like Mira kneading dough until her wrists sang and sending half the loaves to the shelter where men remembered their names at the door. It looked like her daughter standing at a microphone in the school auditorium, reading a poem about a tree that kept its leaves through winter. It looked like her son leaving a Lego astronaut on the bakery shelf with a note that said the astronaut was exploring a planet called Cinnamon. It looked like her taking off the heavy ring for the last time and placing it in the shoebox with the notes, not as treasure, but as artifact. What she built was not about proving him wrong. It was about proving the morning right. One evening, months after the lunch, she went back to the restaurant, not during peak hours. The gulls were turning low, and the water looked like a sheet of beaten metal. She asked for a seat by the window. She ordered soup. She ate slowly. She watched a couple argue gently, the way people who plan to stay together argue. She watched a woman fix her lipstick by the reflection in a spoon. She leaned her forehead against the glass for a second, the way a tired person leans against a door jamb at home. She did not replay the old scene. She watched the city that had held her grief and handed her back her breath. When she left, the host remembered her and gave her a small nod that felt like a hand on the shoulder. Years passed. The sycamore land stayed green because she kept paying the taxes on time. The children turned taller than the porch light. The bakery added a second oven and a small chalkboard where customers wrote what they were grateful for. Gratitude collected there like dew. Mira's hair silvered near her temples, which made her look more like herself. She did not date for a long time. When she finally entertained the idea of a companion, it was not because she was lonely. It was because she had space, and space is an invitation. She met a man who taught music to beginners and believed that every person had a song that lived close to their ribs. They sat on the stoop and listened to traffic, and sometimes said nothing for an hour. It was enough. As for Lila, she disappeared from the photographs and then reappeared in smaller ones. She seemed to learn the cost of glamour, which is constant debt to other people's eyes. She left the city for a while, then returned with shorter hair and a job that had nothing to do with yachts or galleries. She came into the bakery once and bought a loaf. The two women regarded each other without performance. Lila touched the crust and said the bread felt like a door that opened both ways. Mira placed the loaf in a bag and wished her well with a voice that did not tremble. When Lila reached the door, she paused for a heartbeat, as if waiting for the mercy that sometimes arrives late. Mercy did not speak, but it was present. The bag rustled. The door opened. The day received her. In the end, people told the story of the lunch the way they tell urban myths. They added details that never happened. They added lines that were never spoken. They imagined shattered glass and public shame because drama is easier to understand than steadiness. The truth remained simple. A woman reserved the table next to her husband's affair and brought the mistress's husband to see, not to punish, but to witness. She held the moment as a lantern, so no one had to walk further in the dark than necessary. She walked out and built a morning. Mira kept the 2 photographs in a narrow frame above her desk where she wrote grocery lists and donation plans, not as reminders of pain, as reminders of beginning. Under the sycamore, 2 young people leaned into each other with the foolish wisdom of people who believe love is a current that can be owned. On the porch, a woman in a white dress smiled at a dog with white eyelashes. Both photos were innocent in their own way. They did not know the bridges ahead. They did not know the cost of crossing. On some nights, when the bakery was clean and the city had softened its voice, she would look at the frame and feel nothing sharp. She would feel something like gratitude that everything true in her life had survived the weather. He never asked her forgiveness in words that made sense to her. He stopped sending the expensive flowers that browned before they opened. Instead, once a month, he wired funds to the shelter she loved. He signed nothing. He asked for no receipts. It was not penance. It was maintenance on a road he had cracked. She did not call to say thank you. The shelter did that. Gratitude belongs to the work, not to the wound. On a winter morning, she walked past the sycamore and placed her hand against its cold bark. The air was thin and bright. The fields wore frost like lace. She stood there until her breath evened. Wind moved through the branches and found its old music. There are moments when a person can hear their life the way a diver hears his heartbeat underwater. She heard hers. It did not rush. It did not beg. It kept time. When she finally turned toward home, the path was steady and unremarkable, which is the best kind of path for a person who has learned how to carry light. The city waited with its noises and its needs. The bakery would open in an hour. Someone would write on the chalkboard about a small mercy that made their morning easier. She would knead dough and crack eggs and watch the oven windows fog. The day would bloom without asking her to bleed. He would pass her street sometimes, quieter now, his car moving without hurry. He never tried the door. He never leaned on the horn. He paused at the corner under the maple and then continued. She did not stand at the window to watch. She did not need the sight of him to measure her peace. Peace does not measure itself against the people who tried to break it. It measures itself against the person who holds it. She never saw that lunch again, except in the way one sees a coastline from a plane far below, specific and distant. If regret visited Adrian at night, it was his guest to feed. If loneliness visited Lila, it was hers to dress. Mira's house slept in a good silence, the kind you hear in deep snow. The dog with white eyelashes lifted his head when she climbed the stairs and thumped his tail once against the floor. She touched his ear like a benediction. In time, people forgot the details and remembered the tone. They remembered that there is a steadiness that unsettles power more than any storm. They remembered a woman who placed 2 beginnings on a white cloth and walked away without taking anything that was not hers. And sometimes, when the wind moved through the trees near the water, you could almost hear the light fringe of linen switching against wood, and it sounded like someone turning a page without hurry, a page that did not need an ending to be complete.